Count Dooku is supposed to be dead, killed by Anakin Skywalker aboard the Invisible Hand. His hands severed, his life ended by Palpatine's command. But what if that death was a lie? What if the galaxy's most dangerous Sith Lord faked his own death? What if he discovered the true scope of his master's betrayal? And what if he decided to expose everything on the volcanic world of Mustafar, changing the fate of the entire galaxy forever? This is the story of one moment, one choice, one betrayal that could have saved the Republic and destroyed the Empire before it ever began. The crimson blade hums through the air as it severs both of Dooku's hands. The Count's lightsaber clatters to the floor of the Invisible Hand as he collapses to his knees, blood pooling beneath his severed wrists. But as Anakin raises his weapon for the killing blow, something unprecedented happens, something that will change everything. Drawing upon an ancient Sith technique buried deep in forbidden knowledge, Dooku slows his heart to an almost imperceptible beat. He floods his bloodstream with a paralytic toxin he'd secretly ingested before the duel. To all observers, including Anakin and Palpatine, Count Dooku appears dead. But this death is a carefully orchestrated deception. But as Anakin raises his weapon for the killing blow, Count Dooku draws upon knowledge that has remained buried in his mind for decades. Long ago, during his early explorations of Sith teachings, he had discovered an ancient technique known as morikro, the art of slowing one's bodily functions to the point of appearing dead. The technique was dangerous, requiring perfect control over one's connection to the Force, and Dooku had never imagined he would need to use it. But desperation breeds innovation, and in this moment of ultimate betrayal, the Count finds clarity he has not experienced in years. Good, Anakin. Good. Kill him now. Palpatine's voice cuts through the mechanical sounds of the dying ship, filled with satisfaction and malicious glee. But Dooku barely hears the words as he focuses every fiber of his being on the ancient technique. He floods his bloodstream with a paralytic toxin he had secretly ingested before the duel, a failsafe he had installed years ago when he first began to suspect his master's true intentions. The toxin, combined with his Force manipulation of his own biological systems, creates a perfect illusion of death. Anakin hesitates for just a moment, some small part of him that is still a Jedi recognizing the defenseless state of his opponent. He is unarmed. He must stand trial. The words come from somewhere deep within Anakin Skywalker, the man who still believes in justice and due process despite the darkness that has been growing within him for months. He has control of the Senate and the courts. He's too dangerous to be left alive. Palpatine's response is immediate and calculated, pressing on Anakin's fears and his growing distrust of the democratic process. Do it. The blue lightsaber comes down, but instead of striking flesh, it passes through what appears to be Dooku's lifeless form. Unknown to both Anakin and Palpatine, the Count has used his mastery of the Force to project his consciousness into a meditative trance while his physical body lies in a state so close to death that even a Sith Lord cannot detect the deception. As the chaos of the ship's destruction unfolds around them, Dooku maintains his death-like state through sheer force of will. Every alarm klaxon, every shuddering impact of debris against the hull, every vibration as the Invisible Hand begins its death spiral toward Coruscant's surface tests his concentration. But he holds on, knowing that this may be his only chance to escape the trap his master has so carefully constructed. The evacuation is chaotic, with rescue ships barely managing to extract the Chancellor and his rescuers before the massive vessel crashes into the industrial district of Coruscant. In the confusion, Dooku's seemingly lifeless body is ejected into space along with countless pieces of debris and the bodies of other casualties. But the Count is far from dead. Using techniques learned from ancient Sith holocrons, techniques that predate even his master's knowledge, he gradually awakens his body while floating in the cold vacuum of space. The process is excruciating. His severed hands throb with phantom pain as he uses the Force to manipulate the flow of oxygen in his bloodstream, keeping his organs functioning despite the hostile environment. Through the Force, he locates a piece of debris large enough to provide temporary shelter and guides himself toward it with careful applications of telekinetic force. Hidden within the wreckage of a separatist frigate's hull, He finds an emergency survival suit and begins the delicate process of treating his injuries. Hours pass before Dooku feels strong enough to attempt the next phase of his escape. Using the Force to scan the debris field, he locates what he has been searching for. A small emergency vessel that he had planted among the Separatist fleet months ago. The ship had been registered under a false identity and equipped with medical facilities, hyperspace capability, and advanced communication equipment. It was meant to serve as an escape route if his master ever decided he had outlived his usefulness. The foresight now seems prescient. The journey to reach the hidden ship taxes his remaining strength to its limits. Moving through the vacuum of space while wounded and without proper life support equipment would be impossible for most beings. But Dooku's decades of Force training allow him to survive what should be a lethal situation. When he finally reaches the vessel and seals himself inside its life-supporting atmosphere, the Count allows himself a moment of grim satisfaction. His master believes him dead, which provides the perfect opportunity for revenge. But first he must tend to his injuries. The ship's medical bay is equipped with advanced prosthetic technology, and Dooku begins the process of fitting mechanical replacements for his severed hands. The procedure is painful and time-consuming, requiring him to perform delicate surgery on himself while fighting off the effects of blood loss and shock. But pain has always been a teacher in the Sith tradition, and Dooku uses his suffering to fuel his growing anger at his master's betrayal. As he works, his mind races with the implications of what has just occurred. For more than a decade, he had served Darth Sidious faithfully, believing that together they would bring order to a corrupt and chaotic galaxy. He had left the Jedi Order, turned against his former brothers and sisters, and led a war that had claimed billions of lives across thousands of worlds. He had done all of this in service of what he believed was a greater good, a necessary cleansing that would pave the way for a more just and orderly society. But now he sees the truth with perfect clarity. He was never a partner in his master's grand design. He was merely another tool, another weapon to be discarded when it became inconvenient or dangerous. The Separatist movement, the Clone Wars, even his own fall to the dark side, all of it had been carefully orchestrated to serve a single purpose: the elimination of the Jedi Order and the establishment of absolute Sith rule over the galaxy. The revelation fills Dooku with a rage purer and more focused than anything he has felt since his early days as a Sith apprentice. But beneath the anger, there is something else, something that surprises him with its intensity: regret. For the first time in years, Count Dooku allows himself to remember who he had been before his fall, before the disillusionment and cynicism that had driven him from the Jedi Order and into the arms of the Sith. He remembers his time as Qui-Gon Jinn's master, the pride he had felt in his Padawan's compassion and dedication to justice. He remembers the young boy they had discovered on Tatooine, the chosen one who was supposed to bring balance to the Force. He remembers his own younger self, idealistic and determined to make a difference in the galaxy, convinced that the Jedi Order could be a force for positive change if only it could be reformed from within. Where had that man gone? When had noble intentions become twisted into ruthless pragmatism? When had his desire to bring order become an excuse for tyranny and mass murder? The questions plague him as he completes the installation of his prosthetic hands. Their mechanical precision, a cold reminder of how much of his humanity he has lost in service to the dark side. With his immediate medical needs addressed, Dooku turns his attention to his ship's communication systems. What he discovers there fills him with a horror that dwarfs even his anger at his own betrayal. Across the galaxy, Order 66 has been activated. The clone troopers, bred and trained to serve the Republic, have turned on their Jedi commanders with lethal efficiency. The reports flooding in through military channels are devastating in their scope and brutality. On Maigito, Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi has been gunned down by his own troops while leading a charge against Separatist positions. On Felucia, Aayla Secura has been killed by the clones she trusted with her life, her body riddled with blaster bolts as she turned to ask why they had stopped fighting the enemy. On Kashyyyk, Master Luminara Unduli has been executed while trying to protect a group of Wookiee civilians. The pattern is the same everywhere: sudden, coordinated betrayal by the clone armies that the Jedi had come to trust as brothers in arms. But perhaps most horrifying of all are the reports coming from Coruscant itself. The Jedi Temple, the sacred heart of the Order that had stood for millennia, is under attack. Clone troopers of the 501st Legion, led by a dark-robed figure identified only as Lord Vader, have stormed the ancient building and are systematically eliminating everyone inside. Not just the Jedi Masters and Knights, but the Padawan learners, the Temple staff, and most horrifically, the younglings who had barely begun their training in the ways of the Force. The reports are clinical in their brutality, but Dooku's imagination fills in the details that the dry military language cannot capture. Children crying out in fear and confusion as armored soldiers storm through halls they had thought safe. Young Padawans trying desperately to defend their even younger charges with training lightsabers against battle-hardened veterans with military-grade weaponry. Masters who had dedicated their lives to peace and knowledge dying in desperate battles against overwhelming odds, knowing that their deaths would accomplish nothing except to delay the inevitable for a few precious minutes. As he processes the full scope of the massacre, Dooku realizes that this is not merely the elimination of the Jedi Order. It is the systematic murder of everyone who could potentially oppose Sith rule. The clones are also targeting Republic senators known to be sympathetic to the Jedi, military officers whose loyalty might be questionable, and civilian leaders who had spoken out against the increasing militarization of the Republic. It is a purge of unprecedented scope and efficiency, designed to remove any possible source of resistance to the new order that Palpatine is establishing. But it is the identity of the dark figure leading the assault on the temple that truly shakes Dooku to his core. Lord Vader. The name is new, but the Force signature is unmistakable. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, the boy whose destiny was supposed to bring balance to the Force, has fallen to the dark side and become his master's new apprentice. The same young man who had defeated Dooku twice in lightsaber combat, who had shown such promise and such dangerous potential, has now been twisted into an instrument of genocide. The irony is not lost on the Count. For years during the Clone Wars, he had tried to turn Anakin to the dark side, recognizing the boy's power and believing that together they could overthrow Palpatine and reshape the galaxy according to their own vision. He had offered the young Jedi power, knowledge, and freedom from the restrictive codes of the Jedi Order. But Anakin had rejected these overtures, clinging to his loyalty to the Republic and his master Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, it appears that Palpatine has succeeded where Dooku failed, using methods that the Count can only imagine. What had his master offered that Dooku could not? What fears had he exploited? What desires had he promised to fulfill? The answer comes to him as he intercepts more detailed intelligence reports about the new Sith Lord's activities. Vader's first mission after the Temple massacre is to travel to Mustafar and eliminate the Separatist leadership. But there are indications that the mission has personal significance as well. Senator Padme Amidala of Naboo, Anakin's secret wife, is also traveling to Mustafar. The pieces of the puzzle fall into place with sickening clarity. Palpatine had used Anakin's love for Padme as the key to his corruption, promising the power to save her from some terrible fate, most likely death in childbirth. The young Jedi's greatest strength, his capacity for love and attachment, had been turned into the weapon of his own destruction. For the first time in decades, Count Dooku feels something he had almost forgotten: genuine remorse. Not the calculated regret of a political maneuver gone wrong, but the deep, soul-crushing weight of recognizing the true cost of his choices. His years of service to the dark side, his leadership of the Separatist movement, his role in the Clone Wars, all of it had contributed to this moment. He had helped create the conditions that allowed Palpatine to corrupt the Chosen One and destroy the Jedi Order. The Count thinks of his former master, Yoda, ancient and wise, probably dead now along with the rest of the Jedi Council. He remembers Qui-Gon Jinn, his former Padawan, who had died believing in the prophecy of the Chosen One and the eventual triumph of good over evil. How wrong they had all been. How blind they had been to the true scope of Palpatine's manipulations and the depths of Sith cunning. But remorse alone is not enough. As reports continue to pour in about the success of Order 66 and the systematic elimination of the Jedi, Dooku makes a decision that surprises even himself. He will not allow this massacre to continue unopposed. He will not let his former master complete his grand design without facing the consequences of his actions. For the first time in years, the Count feels something approaching his old Jedi instincts stirring within him. A desire to protect the innocent and oppose tyranny regardless of the personal cost. The decision brings with it a moment of startling clarity. For years, he had justified his actions by telling himself that he was working toward a greater good, that the temporary suffering caused by the Clone Wars would eventually lead to lasting peace and order. But now he sees that justification for what it truly was: self-deception. There is no greater good that can justify genocide. There is no noble end that can excuse the means he had employed in service to the dark side. This realization transforms his anger from a destructive force into something more focused and purposeful. He is still furious at his master's betrayal, still burning with rage at his own manipulation. But now that fury is tempered by a desire for justice rather than mere revenge. He wants to stop Palpatine not just because of what the Sith Lord had done to him, but because of what he is doing to the galaxy. Dooku begins planning his next moves with the strategic mind that had made him one of the most effective military leaders of the Clone Wars. His first priority is intelligence gathering. He needs to understand the full scope of Palpatine's plans, identify any weaknesses in the new Imperial structure, and locate any surviving Jedi who might serve as allies in the fight to come. His ship's communication systems are sophisticated enough to intercept transmissions across multiple sectors, and he begins the systematic process of mapping the aftermath of Order 66. The picture that emerges is even grimmer than he had initially feared. The Purge has been devastatingly effective, with entire star systems reporting the successful elimination of their Jedi commanders. But there are also signs of hope scattered throughout the reports. On some worlds, the Jedi had been warned of the betrayal and managed to escape before the clones could act. On others, local populations had intervened to protect their Jedi defenders, resulting in chaotic firefights between civilians and clone troopers. The Empire's victory is not as complete as Palpatine might wish. More importantly, Dooku detects signs of organized resistance beginning to form. Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan is broadcasting coded messages to other senators known to be sympathetic to the Jedi cause. Mon Mothma of Chandrila is organizing secret meetings to discuss political opposition to the new Emperor's emergency powers. Even some military officers are beginning to question orders that seem designed more to consolidate political power than to maintain galactic security. These scattered seeds of rebellion give Dooku hope, but he also recognizes that they will need more than hope to succeed against the full might of the Empire. They will need proof of Palpatine's crimes, evidence that can convince the galaxy that the new Emperor is not the savior he claims to be, but rather a Sith Lord who has manipulated the Republic into destroying itself. Most importantly, they will need to demonstrate that the Jedi were not traitors, but victims of an elaborate conspiracy. As he considers how to provide such evidence, Dooku realizes that his unique position gives him advantages that no other potential rebel possesses. He has spent years at the highest levels of the Sith hierarchy, privy to conversations and plans that even most separatist leaders never knew about. He has recordings of strategy sessions, personal communications with Palpatine, and detailed knowledge of how the Clone Wars were orchestrated from both sides. In the right hands, this information could be devastating to the Emperor's legitimacy. But simply broadcasting the information would not be enough. Palpatine's control over the HoloNet and other communication networks would allow him to dismiss any revelations as separatist propaganda or the desperate lies of a defeated enemy. The evidence would need to be delivered in a way that could not be ignored or explained away, at a moment when its impact would be maximized and its authenticity could be verified. An idea begins to form in Dooku's mind, dangerous and likely suicidal, but potentially capable of changing the course of galactic history. His intelligence networks have detected Vader's mission to Mustafar and the personal nature of his journey there. If Dooku could intercept the new Sith Lord at that crucial moment, when his faith in his master might still be shaken by the magnitude of what he had been asked to do, it might be possible to expose the truth in a way that even the Empire's propaganda machine could not suppress. The plan would require perfect timing and considerable luck. But Dooku has resources that even his former master does not know about. Years of preparing for potential betrayal have left him with hidden bases, secret communication networks, and advanced technology that could give him the edge he needs to confront both Vader and, if necessary, Palpatine himself. Before setting his plan in motion, however, the Count takes time to prepare both physically and mentally for what may be his final mission. The prosthetic hands require calibration and testing to ensure they can handle the delicate manipulations required for lightsaber combat. His ship needs modifications to its communication systems to ensure that any evidence he gathers can be broadcast across the galaxy, regardless of Imperial jamming attempts. Most importantly, he needs to prepare himself psychologically for the possibility of facing his former master in single combat. The meditation techniques he employs are not the dark rituals of Sith training, but the centering exercises he learned as a young Jedi, practices he had not used in decades. The irony is not lost on him that in preparing to betray his Sith master, he finds himself returning to the teachings of his Jedi youth. But the techniques work, helping him achieve a state of mental clarity he had not experienced since before his fall to the dark side. As he meditates, Dooku reflects on the nature of redemption and whether it is possible for someone who has committed the crimes he has to ever truly atone for their actions. Millions have died because of his leadership of the separatist movement. Entire worlds have been devastated by battles he planned and executed. Countless families have been destroyed by the war he helped orchestrate. Can any single act of heroism, no matter how significant, balance that scale of destruction? The question has no easy answer, but Dooku finds a kind of peace in accepting that redemption may not be possible for him. What matters now is not his own salvation, but the prevention of even greater atrocities. If he can stop Palpatine's reign of terror, if he can help preserve some spark of hope for the galaxy's future, then perhaps his final actions will have meaning even if they cannot erase his past crimes. This acceptance brings with it a freedom he had not felt in years. For the first time since joining the Sith, Count Dooku is not fighting for personal power or advantage, but for something greater than himself. The sensation is both liberating and terrifying, stripping away the familiar certainties of the dark side and forcing him to confront the complexities of genuine moral choice. With his preparations complete, Dooku sets course for Mustafar, knowing that he is embarking on a journey from which he may never return. The volcanic world has always held significance in Sith lore, its rivers of molten rock symbolizing the destructive passion that fuels the dark side of the Force. It seems fitting that it should be the site of his final confrontation with the ideology that had consumed his life for so many years. As his ship enters hyperspace, the Count uses the travel time to review everything he knows about Anakin Skywalker, now calling himself Darth Vader. The young man is immensely powerful in the Force, perhaps the most naturally gifted individual Dooku has ever encountered. His lightsaber skills have grown considerably since their last encounter, fueled by years of constant warfare and the aggressive emotions of the dark side. Most importantly, his fall to the Sith appears to be recent and traumatic, which might make him vulnerable to doubt and manipulation. But Vader is also dangerous in ways that extend beyond his Force powers. His transformation into a Sith Lord has been accompanied by a complete rejection of his former identity as Anakin Skywalker. This psychological break makes him unpredictable and potentially unstable, capable of extreme violence without warning or remorse. Confronting such an individual would be challenging under the best circumstances, and Dooku's current physical condition is far from optimal. The prosthetic hands, while functional, lack the sensitivity and precision of natural limbs. His recent injuries have left him weaker than usual, and he has not had time to fully adjust to his new mechanical appendages. In a lightsaber duel against an opponent of Vader's caliber, these disadvantages could prove fatal. But Dooku has advantages of his own: experience, strategic thinking, and most importantly, knowledge of the truth that Vader does not yet possess. The journey to Mustafar also provides time for final preparations. Dooku records detailed messages explaining his actions and revealing everything he knows about Palpatine's conspiracy. These recordings are uploaded to multiple secure servers scattered across the galaxy, programmed to broadcast automatically if he fails to check in within a specified time period. Even if he dies on Mustafar, his revelations will still reach the growing resistance movement. He also prepares more immediate communication equipment, devices capable of broadcasting across multiple channels simultaneously and powerful enough to penetrate most forms of electronic jamming. If he can create even a brief window of opportunity, he can ensure that his confrontation with Vader and any revelations that emerge from it will be witnessed by beings across the galaxy. Public exposure of the truth may be the rebels' greatest weapon against Imperial propaganda. When his ship finally drops out of hyperspace at Mustafar, the volcanic world spreads before him like a vision of hell itself. Rivers of lava carve glowing channels across the planet's surface, while mining facilities extract valuable materials from the molten rock. The industrial complexes built by the Techno-Union and other separatist organizations during the Clone Wars still operate, now under Imperial control, their mechanical operations providing a stark counterpoint to the natural chaos of the volcanic environment. Dooku's sensors immediately detect multiple ships in orbit and on the planet's surface. Vader's personal fighter is docked at the main mining facility, along with a ship registered to Senator Amidala and another vessel that the Count recognizes as belonging to Obi-Wan Kenobi. The presence of all three individuals at the same location confirms his intelligence, reports, and suggests that his timing may be perfect for maximum dramatic impact. He lands his own ship at a concealed location several kilometers from the main facility, using the volcanic terrain to mask his presence from sensor sweeps. The journey to the mining complex on foot gives him time to center himself mentally and physically for the confrontation ahead. As he walks across the black rock formations with their veins of glowing lava, Dooku reflects on the symbolism of the location. Mustafar has always represented the destructive power of unchecked passion in Sith philosophy, but it is also a place of transformation where base materials are refined by fire into something more valuable. Perhaps his own journey will follow a similar pattern. Perhaps the fires of this final confrontation will burn away the dross of his Sith identity and reveal whatever kernel of good still exists within him. Or perhaps he will simply burn, consumed by the same destructive forces he had served for so many years. Either way, he accepts that this volcanic world will likely be the site of his death. As he approaches the main facility, the sounds of conflict reach his ears across the industrial landscape. The distinctive hum and clash of lightsabers echoes off the metal structures, while voices raised in anger and anguish carry on the superheated air. Dooku quickens his pace, recognizing that he may be arriving at the crucial moment of Vader's confrontation with both his wife and his former master. What he witnesses when he finally reaches the scene stops him in his tracks. Anakin Skywalker, now dressed in the dark robes of a Sith Lord, stands over the collapsed form of his pregnant wife while she gasps for air. The young man's face is a mask of rage and pain, his eyes yellow with the corruption of the dark side as he uses the Force to choke the woman he claims to love. The sight fills Dooku with a mixture of horror and recognition, reminding him of his own moments of rage and violence when the dark side had overwhelmed his better judgment. Before he can intervene, another figure emerges from Padmé's ship, moving with the careful precision of a Jedi Master approaching a dangerous situation. Obi-Wan Kenobi steps into view, his face a mask of grief and determination as he confronts the man who had once been his closest friend and most promising student. The heartbreak in the older Jedi's expression is evident even from a distance, and Dooku realizes that he is witnessing one of the great tragedies in the history of the Force. The confrontation between master and former apprentice unfolds with painful intensity. Obi-Wan's desperate attempts to reach whatever remains of Anakin Skywalker within the Sith Lord's corrupted form, Vader's angry justifications for his actions and accusations against the Jedi Order, and Padme's collapse as the stress and force choking take their toll. Each word exchanged drives the combatants further apart, making peaceful resolution increasingly unlikely. Stepping out from his concealment behind a mining structure, the Count ignites his new lightsaber, its crimson blade casting eerie shadows across the volcanic landscape. The weapon is similar to his old one, but modified with a slightly curved hilt that accommodates his prosthetic hands. Both Vader and Obi-Wan turn in shock at his appearance, their own conflict temporarily forgotten in the face of this unexpected development. The silence that follows is pregnant with possibility and danger. For several heartbeats, none of the three combatants moves, each assessing this new dynamic and calculating the implications. Vader's hand moves instinctively toward his lightsaber hilt, while Obi-Wan's posture shifts to accommodate the potential threat from a second Sith opponent. Only Padme remains oblivious to the new arrival, still struggling to recover from her ordeal. "Surprised to see me alive, Lord Vader?" Dooku's voice carries across the space between them with perfect clarity, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "Your master thought me conveniently disposable, just as he will eventually dispose of you when your usefulness has ended." The accusation hangs in the air like a challenge, designed to plant seeds of doubt in Vader's mind about his new master's loyalty and long-term intentions. Vader's response is immediate and predictably violent. His lightsaber snaps to life with an aggressive flourish, the blue blade humming with barely contained fury. The young Sith's entire posture radiates hostility and the promise of violence. But there is something else there as well: uncertainty. Deep within the corrupted exterior, some part of Anakin Skywalker recognizes the truth in Dooku's words, remembers the inconsistencies and manipulations that had brought him to this point. Lies. "You seek to turn me against my master just as you tried before on Geonosis. Lord Sidious saved me from the Jedi's hypocrisy and gave me the power to protect those I love." The words come out in a rush, as if Vader is trying to convince himself as much as his opponents. But there is a brittleness to his certainty, a fragility that suggests his faith in Palpatine might not be as absolute as he claims. And how well has that power served you? Dooku gestures toward the still unconscious form of Padme, his mechanical hand moving with precise economy. "You have nearly killed the very person you sought to protect. And for what? For promises made by a man who views you as nothing more than a useful tool." The Count's voice carries a mixture of contempt and genuine sadness, the tone of someone who recognizes his own mistakes reflected in another's actions. Obi-Wan watches this exchange with growing comprehension and hope. The unexpected arrival of Count Dooku, apparently alive and seemingly opposed to both Vader and the Emperor, represents a development he had not anticipated. More importantly, the Sith Lord's words are clearly having an effect on his former Padawan, introducing doubt into what had seemed like absolute certainty just moments before. The Count continues his psychological assault, knowing that words might accomplish what lightsabers cannot. "I spent years serving the man you call Emperor, believing that together we would create a better galaxy. I defended his vision, executed his plans, and sacrificed everything in service to his cause. Do you know what my reward was for this loyalty? He ordered you to kill me the moment I became inconvenient, disposing of me like a broken tool that had outlived its usefulness." This revelation strikes at one of Vader's deepest fears, the possibility of abandonment and betrayal by those he serves. The young Sith's stance wavers slightly as he processes the implications of what Dooku is saying. If the Emperor was willing to discard someone as powerful and useful as Count Dooku, what guarantee does Vader have that he will not suffer the same fate? But the dark side provides its own answer to such doubts, flooding Vader's mind with anger and hatred that burns away uncertainty. "You were weak, old man. You failed because you lacked the strength to claim what was rightfully yours. I am not you, and I will not make your mistakes." The words are harsh, but there is something desperate about them, as if Vader is trying to convince himself that his situation is fundamentally different from Dooku's. Recognizing that verbal persuasion alone will not be sufficient, Dooku reaches into his robes and produces a small recording device, one that he activates with a gesture from his prosthetic hand. The holographic projector springs to life, displaying a conversation between Dooku and Palpatine that had taken place years earlier during the height of the Clone Wars. In the recording, the future Emperor discusses his long-term plans with chilling casualness, including his intention to eventually eliminate both his current apprentice and the Chosen One once they had served their purposes. The effect on Vader is immediate and dramatic. His aggressive posture crumbles as he stares at the holographic display, watching his master casually discuss his expendability as if he were discussing the weather. The young Sith's breathing becomes labored, his mechanical respirator cycling more rapidly as emotional turmoil overwhelms his carefully constructed mental defenses. "You see, my young friend," the recording continues in Palpatine's cultured voice, "apprentices are ultimately temporary arrangements. The Chosen One's emotional instability makes him useful for certain tasks, but it also makes him unreliable in the long term. When the time comes to establish permanent order, we will need someone more stable to serve as the face of the new regime, someone who can inspire loyalty without the risk of emotional breakdown." The words hit Vader like physical blows, each casual dismissal of his worth and reliability striking at the core of his identity as a Sith Lord. This is not the first time he has heard such sentiments from Palpatine, but seeing them expressed so candidly in private conversation strips away any possibility of misunderstanding or misinterpretation. His master views him as a temporary asset, useful for the transition period, but ultimately disposable once permanent power has been consolidated. The psychological impact of this revelation manifests physically as Vader's control over the Force becomes erratic and unfocused. Waves of conflicting emotion ripple outward from his position, causing nearby equipment to spark and malfunction, while the volcanic ground beneath his feet cracks under the pressure of his unleashed power. For several moments, the corrupted young man teeters on the edge of a complete psychological breakdown. Obi-Wan recognizes the opportunity this crisis presents and steps forward carefully, his voice gentle but urgent. "Anakin, you can see the truth now. Palpatine never cared about you or Padme. He used your love for her as a weapon against you, corrupted your desire to protect her into a tool for his own ambitions. But it's not too late. You can still choose a different path." The use of his original name seems to penetrate Vader's psychological defenses in a way that titles and formal address could not. For a moment, something human flickers in the yellow eyes, a glimpse of the man who had once fought alongside the Jedi to protect the innocent and uphold justice. But the moment passes quickly, overwhelmed by years of conditioning and the intoxicating power of the dark side. Instead of responding to Obi-Wan's appeal, Vader turns his rage toward the source of his emotional turmoil. With a wordless roar of fury, he launches himself at Count Dooku, his lightsaber describing brilliant arcs through the superheated air as he seeks to silence the voice that has introduced such painful doubt into his carefully constructed worldview. The duel that follows is unlike any lightsaber combat witnessed in recent galactic history. Three masters of the Force, each drawing upon decades of training and experience in different fighting traditions, engage in a battle that transcends mere physical conflict and becomes a clash of competing philosophies and worldviews. Dooku fights with a desperate intensity born of knowledge that this may be his final opportunity to undo some of the damage his years of service to the dark side have caused. His Form 2 dueling technique, refined over decades of practice, allows him to hold his own against Vader's raw power, despite the handicap of his prosthetic hands. But there is something different about his fighting style now. A defensive quality that prioritizes protection and deflection over the aggressive offense that had characterized his battles as a Sith Lord. Vader's assault is relentless and emotionally driven, fueled by the psychological turmoil that Dooku's revelations have triggered. His Form V technique has been modified by years of warfare and the influence of the dark side, becoming something more brutal and direct than the elegant combat form originally taught by the Jedi. Each strike carries not just physical force, but the weight of his anger and confusion, making him a formidable but somewhat predictable opponent. Obi-Wan finds himself in the unprecedented situation of fighting alongside his former enemy against his former apprentice, a development that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. His Form 3 defensive techniques complement Dooku's dueling style surprisingly well, allowing the two older fighters to coordinate their efforts against Vader's overwhelming assault. The irony is not lost on any of the combatants that circumstances have forced such unlikely cooperation. The battle rages across the industrial landscape of Mustafar, transforming the mining facility into an arena of unprecedented destruction. The three combatants leap from platform to platform, their lightsabers casting wild shadows against the volcanic landscape as they navigate the treacherous terrain. Sparks fly as lightsaber blades slice through duraplast and metal, sending fragments of destroyed equipment cascading into the lava flows below. A massive crane arm, severed by one of Vader's wild swings, crashes down between the combatants, forcing them to leap in opposite directions. Obi-Wan uses this moment of separation to press his own attack, his blue blade seeking the gaps in Vader's defenses with the methodical patience that had made him a master of sorcery. "You were my brother, Anakin." Obi-Wan's voice carries across the platform, filled with anguish and desperate hope. "I loved you like family, trained you, fought beside you through countless battles. How can you throw all of that away for the promises of a Sith Lord who sees you as nothing more than a replaceable asset?" The words strike deeper than any lightsaber thrust, and Vader's response comes not in words but in a torrent of force lightning that arcs between his fingertips toward his former master. The electrical discharge illuminates the volcanic landscape in stark blue-white light, but Obi-Wan's lightsaber intercepts the attack, the energy crackling along the blade's length before dissipating harmlessly into the superheated atmosphere. "You taught me well, Master," Vader snarls, his voice distorted by emotion and the mechanical requirements of his breathing apparatus. "But you also taught me that sometimes the greatest love requires the greatest sacrifice. I sacrifice my old self, my weakness, my blind loyalty to a corrupt order that would have let the galaxy burn rather than take decisive action." Dooku seizes this moment of dialogue to reveal more of his prepared evidence, activating a second holographic projector that displays a recording of Palpatine meeting with Kaminoan cloning specialists. The Emperor's voice echoes across the platform as he discusses backup plans for replacing both Vader and Dooku with more compliant alternatives. The casual way he refers to their disposability, comparing them to equipment that might need upgrading or replacement, strips away any pretense of genuine partnership or loyalty. "Do you hear that, boy?" Dooku's mechanical hand gestures toward the holographic display while his organic one maintains his defensive posture. "You are not his chosen successor or valued apprentice. You are inventory to be managed and replaced when more efficient models become available. Every promise he made about saving your wife, every assurance about your importance to his plans, was calculated manipulation designed to secure your compliance until he no longer needs it." The revelation hits Vader with visible impact, his aggressive assault faltering as psychological turmoil overwhelms his tactical thinking. His lightsaber work becomes erratic and unfocused, creating openings that both older fighters could exploit if they chose to press their advantage. But something in the young Sith's demeanor gives them pause, a vulnerability that speaks to the Anakin Skywalker still buried beneath the dark side corruption. Instead of capitalizing on Vader's momentary weakness, Obi-Wan makes another attempt at reaching his former Padawan. "The recording proves what I've been trying to tell you, Anakin. Palpatine never intended to save Padme. Her death would have served his purposes by completing your transformation to the dark side, making you completely dependent on his guidance and approval. The visions you experienced were not prophetic warnings, but psychological manipulation, designed to create the very outcome they purported to prevent." These words trigger something deep within Vader's psyche, a memory of the nightmares that had plagued him for months before his fall. The dreams had been vivid and terrifying, showing Padme's death in childbirth with perfect clarity. But now, confronted with evidence of his master's manipulative nature, he begins to question whether those visions had been genuine glimpses of the future or carefully planted suggestions designed to drive him toward the dark side. The psychological revelation manifests physically as Vader's control over the Force becomes increasingly unstable. Waves of telekinetic energy ripple outward from his position, causing the mining platform to shake violently as support beams buckle under invisible pressure. Emergency alarms begin to sound throughout the facility as automated safety systems detect structural damage that threatens the integrity of the entire complex. Taking advantage of this chaos, Dooku advances with renewed purpose, his lightsaber weaving complex patterns that force Vader to focus on immediate survival rather than psychological turmoil. The Count's technique has evolved during their conversation, incorporating elements of his old Jedi training that prioritize protection over destruction. His attacks seek to disable rather than kill, creating opportunities for capture and potential redemption rather than simple elimination. But Vader's response to this mercy is explosive violence that threatens everyone present. Unable to reconcile the evidence of his manipulation with his need to believe in his choices, the young Sith lashes out with raw force power that exceeds anything Dooku has previously witnessed. The mining platform buckles under the assault, its metal superstructure groaning as invisible forces tear at its foundation. The combatants are forced to leap to adjacent platforms as their original battleground collapses into the lava flows below. The new terrain is even more treacherous, consisting of narrow walkways suspended over rivers of molten rock with minimal safety barriers. Steam vents erupt unpredictably from the volcanic surface, creating additional hazards that all three fighters must navigate while maintaining their deadly dance. On the secondary platform, Dooku produces his most damaging piece of evidence, a recording of Palpatine discussing the specific psychological techniques used to corrupt Anakin Skywalker. The Emperor's voice analyzes the young Jedi's personality with clinical detachment, identifying his attachment to Padme as the primary vulnerability that could be exploited to ensure his fall to the dark side. The boy's emotional instability is actually advantageous for our purposes. Palpatine's recorded voice explains to an unseen audience. His fear of loss makes him susceptible to promises of power over life and death, while his anger at perceived injustice can be channeled into hatred of the Jedi Order. By presenting myself as the only person capable of saving his wife, I create a dependency that will ensure his loyalty through the transition period. This clinical dissection of his psychological manipulation proves to be the breaking point for Vader's carefully constructed mental defenses. The young Sith's breathing becomes labored as he confronts the undeniable evidence that every emotion he had experienced, every fear he had felt, and every decision he had made during his fall had been anticipated and orchestrated by the man he now serves as master. "You made me into this." Vader's voice rises to a scream as he gestures toward his own dark-robed form. Every step, every choice, every moment of pain and transformation was part of your grand design. I thought I was saving the woman I loved, but I was actually ensuring her destruction. I thought I was preventing the very future that you had planned all along. The accusation hangs in the superheated air between them, pregnant with the potential for either redemption or complete psychological collapse. For several heartbeats, none of the combatants move, each recognizing that they have reached a crucial decision point that will determine not only the outcome of their immediate conflict, but potentially the fate of the entire galaxy. It is Obi-Wan who breaks the silence, his voice gentle but urgent as he addresses the tormented young man who had once been his closest friend. "Anakin, you can see the truth now. Everything Palpatine told you was designed to serve his purposes, not yours. But understanding his deception doesn't have to define your future. You still have choices to make, and those choices can honor the memory of who you used to be." The appeal reaches something deep within Vader's corrupted psyche. a spark of the idealism and compassion that had once defined Anakin Skywalker. For a moment, his yellow eyes flicker with something approaching hope as he considers the possibility that redemption might still be possible despite the magnitude of his crimes. The moment stretches out like a held breath, filled with infinite potential for transformation and renewal. But the dark side does not release its hold on willing servants easily. The conditioning that Palpatine had spent years instilling in his apprentice reasserts itself with overwhelming force, flooding Vader's mind with rage and hatred that burns away doubt and uncertainty. The brief glimpse of Anakin Skywalker disappears beneath the Sith Lord's renewed embrace of the darkness that had consumed his life. With a roar that echoes across the volcanic landscape, Vader unleashes the full magnitude of his force powers in an attack that transcends anything previously witnessed in galactic history. Lightning arcs from his fingertips in quantities that dwarf even Emperor Palpatine's most devastating displays, while telekinetic forces tear at the very foundations of the mining facility. The assault is so massive and unfocused that it threatens not only his immediate opponents but also the unconscious Padme and the structural integrity of the entire complex. Recognizing the immediate danger to everyone present, Dooku makes a decision that defines his legacy and redeems his decades of service to the dark side. Drawing upon Force techniques learned from both Jedi and Sith traditions, he begins to channel Vader's devastating attack away from its intended targets and toward himself. The process requires him to open himself completely to the deadly energies, absorbing lightning. As his body begins to fail under the impossible strain, Dooku uses his remaining strength to activate the final element of his prepared evidence. Broadcast transmitters hidden throughout the facility spring to life, sending his recordings across multiple communication networks that span the galaxy. The evidence of Palpatine's deception begins to reach rebel sympathizers, hidden Jedi survivors, and political dissidents on thousands of worlds, carried by signals too numerous and diverse for Imperial forces to effectively jam or suppress. The Count's final words carry across the volcanic landscape with perfect clarity despite the electrical storm raging around him. His voice reaches not only those present at the mining facility, but also the countless beings across the galaxy who receive his broadcast, creating a moment of shared witness to his ultimate act of redemption. Citizens of the galaxy, my name is Count Dooku, and I stand before you as proof that even the darkest soul can choose the light when confronted with ultimate truth. For years I served the man you know as Emperor Palpatine, believing that together we could bring order to a chaotic universe. I was wrong. Everything I fought for, everything I sacrificed, everything I became in service to the dark side was built on lies and manipulation. The evidence I now broadcast contains proof that your Emperor is Darth Sidious, a Sith Lord who orchestrated the Clone Wars from both sides to destroy the Jedi Order and seize absolute power over the galaxy. The Republic you mourned was murdered not by external enemies, but by the very man who claimed to defend it. The Jedi you were taught to fear as traitors were actually victims of the most elaborate conspiracy in galactic history. But I do not ask you to take my word alone. Listen to the recordings, examine the evidence, and reach your own conclusions about the nature of the regime that now rules over you. More importantly, remember that it is never too late to choose resistance over compliance, hope over despair, and light over darkness. The choices we make in moments of ultimate crisis define not only our own destiny, but the legacy we leave for future generations. To those who still fight for freedom in the shadows, know that your cause is just and your sacrifices are not in vain. To those who serve the Empire believing they protect peace and order, consider whether the methods you employ truly serve the ideals you claim to defend. And to the young man I once knew as Anakin Skywalker, remember that redemption is always possible for those brave enough to confront the truth about their choices and strong enough to choose a different path. The Force binds us all together, connecting every living being in a web of shared destiny and mutual responsibility. Use that connection to find the strength necessary to resist tyranny wherever it emerges. And never forget that even in the galaxy's darkest hour, hope can emerge from the most unlikely sources. May the Force be with you all, and may the light ultimately triumph over the darkness that threatens to consume everything we hold dear. With those final words, Count Dooku's body finally succumbs to the massive electrical discharge that has been coursing through him. His form crumples to the volcanic ground as his life force merges with the cosmic force, his death marking the end of one of the galaxy's most complex and contradictory figures. The sacrifice has the immediate effect of dissipating Vader's lightning attack, leaving the young Sith Lord standing alone among the industrial ruins with the weight of what his uncontrolled rage has accomplished. The silence that follows is broken only by the mechanical sounds of damaged mining equipment and the distant rumble of volcanic activity. Vader stands motionless for several minutes, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly as he processes the magnitude of what has just occurred. For the first time since his transformation into a Sith Lord, he has killed someone not in service to his master's plans, but as a direct result of his own emotional instability. Exactly the kind of behavior that Palpatine's recordings had identified as his greatest weakness and most exploitable vulnerability. The realization strikes him with devastating force as he understands that he has just provided perfect validation for his master's dismissive assessment of his reliability and long-term value. The very act of killing Dooku in an uncontrolled rage has demonstrated precisely why Palpatine views him as ultimately expendable, a useful tool whose emotional volatility makes him unsuitable for permanent leadership responsibilities. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan uses this moment of shocked stillness to gather the unconscious Padme and begin moving toward her ship. The recordings that Dooku died to protect have already begun their automated broadcast sequence, but the Jedi Master recognizes that physical copies will be essential for establishing credibility and providing detailed evidence to the growing resistance movement. He clutches the data storage devices against his chest like precious relics, understanding that they represent the rebellion's best hope for exposing Palpatine's conspiracy. As he carries the pregnant senator toward safety, Obi-Wan cannot shake the image of his former apprentice standing alone among the volcanic flames, consumed by the very darkness he had sought to master. The young man who had once shown such promise for bringing balance to the Force has become its greatest threat, twisted by manipulation and corrupted by power into something that barely resembles the idealistic Jedi Knight who had fought so valiantly during the Clone Wars. But even in this moment of apparent defeat, the Jedi Master recognizes that seeds of doubt have been planted in Vader's mind. The evidence of Palpatine's manipulation may not have immediately turned the young Sith against his master, but it has introduced uncertainty into what had previously been absolute faith. That uncertainty represents a crack in the psychological armor that the Emperor had so carefully constructed around his apprentice, a vulnerability that might eventually be exploited by those who remember the good man that Vader had once been. The immediate aftermath of Count Dooku's sacrifice and the broadcast of his evidence creates ripple effects that spread across the galaxy with unprecedented speed. The recordings reach rebel communication networks, hidden Jedi survivors, sympathetic senators, and civilian populations on thousands of worlds simultaneously, creating a moment of shared revelation that undermines the very foundations of imperial legitimacy. On Alderaan, Bail Organa receives the transmission in his private study and immediately begins coordinating with other senators who have maintained secret opposition to Palpatine's increasing authoritarianism. The evidence provides them with the proof they have long suspected but could never demonstrate, that the Emperor's rise to power was built entirely on deception and manufactured crisis. Organa's first action is to contact Mon Mothma of Chandrila, beginning the formation of what will eventually become the Rebel Alliance's political leadership. The recordings also reach surviving Jedi scattered across the galaxy, many of whom had gone into hiding following the devastation of Order 66. Masters like Yoda, who had managed to escape the initial purge, find in Dooku's evidence the validation they need to begin actively opposing Imperial rule rather than simply surviving in exile. The knowledge that their order's destruction was the result of a Sith conspiracy, rather than genuine treason, helps restore the moral authority necessary to attract new followers and rebuild their shattered organization. Perhaps most importantly, The broadcasts reached civilian populations who had accepted Imperial rule as a necessary response to the chaos of the clone wars. Dooku's revelations about Palpatine's manipulation of both sides in the conflict forces ordinary citizens to reconsider their assumptions about the new government and its supposed commitment to peace and stability. Protests begin to emerge on worlds throughout the galaxy, demanding answers about the Emperor's true identity and the circumstances surrounding the Republic's transformation. The Imperial response to these revelations is swift and brutal, demonstrating exactly the kind of authoritarian overreach that Dooku's evidence had warned against. Stormtrooper units deploy to suppress protests, while Imperial intelligence services work desperately to jam further broadcasts and arrest anyone found in possession of the incriminating recordings. But the evidence has already spread too widely to be effectively contained, creating a crisis of legitimacy that forces Palpatine to accelerate many of his long-term plans for consolidating absolute power. On Coruscant, the Emperor rages in his private chambers as reports of the broadcast's impact flood in from across the galaxy. The careful timeline he had constructed for transforming the Republic into the Empire has been disrupted by revelations that strip away the democratic facade he had maintained during the transition period. Citizens who had willingly accepted emergency powers as a temporary measure now question whether those powers will ever be relinquished, while military officers begin to wonder whether their oath of loyalty was obtained through deception. But it is the personal impact on Darth Vader that proves most significant for the galaxy's long-term future. The young Sith Lord returns to Imperial Center, carrying not only the physical evidence of his uncontrolled rage, but also the psychological weight of Dooku's final message. The knowledge that his fall to the dark side had been orchestrated from the beginning, that his fears for Padme had been deliberately cultivated and exploited, creates a crisis of identity that undermines his absolute faith in his Sith master. This psychological turmoil manifests in subtle but significant changes to Vader's behavior over the following months and years. He begins to question orders that seem designed more to consolidate political power than to maintain galactic security. His treatment of subordinates becomes less arbitrary and cruel, reflecting a growing awareness of the human cost of Imperial policies. Most importantly, he starts to investigate the circumstances of Padme's survival and the birth of their children, actions that will eventually lead him to discover the existence of Luke and Leia. The survival of Padme Amidala herself represents one of the most significant changes to the galactic timeline. Without the trauma of being force-choked to near death and the despair that accompanied her husband's fall, she gives birth to the twins under much different circumstances. Her recovery is swift and complete, allowing her to throw herself immediately into the work of organizing political resistance to Imperial rule. Her status as a former queen and respected senator provides the nascent rebellion with credibility and moral authority that proves essential for attracting support from legitimate governments. Working closely with Bail Organa and Mon Mothma, Padme becomes one of the founding architects of the Rebel Alliance's political structure. Her experience in democratic governance and her understanding of Imperial weaknesses gained through her marriage to Vader make her an invaluable strategic asset. More importantly, her personal story of survival and resistance becomes a powerful symbol for beings across the galaxy who refuse to accept authoritarian rule as inevitable. The twins themselves grow up in very different circumstances than their counterparts in the original timeline. Instead of being separated and hidden, Luke and Leia are raised together under the protection of the growing Rebel Alliance. They know from an early age that their father is Darth Vader, but they also understand the circumstances that led to his fall and the possibility of his eventual redemption. This knowledge shapes their development in profound ways, making them more psychologically prepared for the challenges they will eventually face. Their training in the Force begins much earlier and under better circumstances than it might have otherwise. With surviving Jedi like Yoda available to provide instruction and their mother's political network offering protection, the twins develop their abilities in a supportive environment that emphasizes balance and responsibility rather than secrecy and fear. By the time they reach adulthood, they are not merely powerful Force users but also experienced leaders who Understand the complexities of galactic politics and military strategy. The early formation of organized resistance also fundamentally changes the trajectory of Imperial expansion and technological development. Instead of facing scattered, uncoordinated opposition that could be easily crushed, Palpatine must contend with a rebel alliance that has access to inside information about his plans and capabilities. This forces him to divert resources from expansion to internal security, slowing the pace at which he can transform the galaxy's political and economic structures. Military campaigns that might have been swift victories in the original timeline become prolonged conflicts as rebel forces use Dooku's intelligence to anticipate Imperial strategies and prepare effective countermeasures. The construction of superweapons like the Death Star faces sabotage from within, as rebel sympathizers use the Count's information to identify and exploit vulnerabilities in the Empire's most secret projects. Even when such weapons are successfully completed, the rebellion's advanced knowledge allows them to prepare countermeasures that minimize their strategic impact. The psychological impact of Dooku's redemption also resonates throughout both the Rebel Alliance and the Imperial military. For the rebels, his sacrifice becomes a foundational myth that demonstrates the possibility of redemption even for those who have committed terrible crimes in service to the dark side. This message proves particularly powerful for recruiting former Imperial personnel who have become disillusioned with the regime they once served. The knowledge that even a Sith Lord could choose to do what was right when confronted with ultimate truth provides hope for anyone struggling with questions of loyalty and moral compromise. For Imperial forces, particularly those who had served under Dooku during the Clone Wars, his final betrayal raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of loyalty and the true goals of the regime they serve. Many officers who had respected the Count's tactical brilliance and strategic vision find themselves wondering whether their own service might be based on similar deceptions. This crisis of confidence contributes to defection rates that force the Empire to implement increasingly harsh measures to maintain military discipline and political control. The revelation that the Clone Wars were orchestrated by the very person who claimed to be their victim also has profound implications for how the galaxy understands the nature of conflict and political manipulation. Citizens who had accepted the transformation of the Republic into the Empire as a necessary response to external threats begin to question whether other crises might be manufactured for political advantage. This skepticism makes it much more difficult for Palpatine to justify future military actions or emergency measures, forcing him to rely increasingly on naked force rather than popular support. The preservation of democratic institutions and traditions also proves crucial for the galaxy's long-term stability. In the original timeline, the complete destruction of the Republic's governmental structure left a vacuum that could only be filled by Imperial bureaucracy. But with early resistance maintaining alternative centers of power and legitimacy, the Empire is never able to achieve the total control that would have made its rule unassailable. Rebel-controlled systems provide examples of democratic governance that demonstrate alternatives to Imperial authoritarianism, keeping alive the ideals that will eventually form the foundation of the new Republic. The impact on Force traditions throughout the galaxy extends far beyond the immediate survival of individual Jedi. Dooku's evidence about Sith manipulation of galactic events helps preserve other Force-sensitive groups that might otherwise have been destroyed or driven underground. The Guardians of the Wills on Jeddah, the Witches of Dathomir, and various other traditions find the courage to emerge from hiding and contribute their unique perspectives to the growing resistance movement. This diversity of Force traditions proves invaluable in developing new approaches to training and philosophy that avoid the dogmatic extremes that had characterized the ancient conflict between Jedi and Sith. The new synthesis that emerges incorporates wisdom from multiple sources while maintaining the core principles of compassion, justice, and service to the greater good that define the light side of the Force. This more inclusive and flexible approach produces Force users who are better equipped to deal with the complexities of galactic politics and less susceptible to the kind of manipulation that had led to previous catastrophes. The technological implications of early organized resistance also prove significant for the galaxy's development. With access to Dooku's intelligence about Imperial research programs and manufacturing capabilities, Rebel engineers are able to develop countermeasures and competing technologies that prevent the Empire from achieving technological dominance. The collaborative nature of the resistance movement also accelerates innovation by bringing together scientists and engineers from different worlds and traditions who might never have worked together under Imperial rule. Perhaps most importantly, the early exposure of Palpatine's true nature prevents him from completing the systematic elimination of potential rivals and alternative power centers that was a key component of his long-term strategy. Regional governors who might have been quietly replaced with Imperial loyalists instead find the political support necessary to maintain their independence. Sector fleets that might have been disbanded or absorbed into the Imperial Navy instead form the backbone of Rebel military forces. Economic networks that might have been restructured to serve Imperial interests instead provide the resources necessary to sustain prolonged resistance. As the years pass and the galactic civil war intensifies, the legend of Count Dooku's final stand on Mustafar grows in significance and symbolic power. The man who had once been one of the galaxy's most feared villains becomes remembered as one of its most unlikely heroes. Proof that redemption is possible even for those who have fallen furthest into darkness. His sacrifice becomes a touchstone for beings across the galaxy who struggle with questions of loyalty, moral compromise, and the possibility of atonement for past mistakes. The recordings he died to protect become foundational documents for the new galactic government that eventually emerges from the ashes of the Empire. His detailed knowledge of Sith philosophy and methods proves invaluable in designing safeguards against future manipulation by dark side adepts, while his insights into the weaknesses of democratic institutions help create more resilient systems of governance. Even his failures as a Sith Lord contribute to the galaxy's wisdom, providing crucial understanding of how good intentions can be corrupted by the pursuit of power without moral restraint. Educational institutions throughout the liberated galaxy study Dooku's transformation from idealistic Jedi to Sith enforcer, to redeemed martyr as a case study in the complexity of moral choice and the possibility of personal growth, even under the most challenging circumstances. His story becomes a mandatory part of civic education, teaching future generations about the dangers of authoritarianism and the importance of maintaining skepticism toward leaders who claim to have simple solutions to complex problems. The volcanic fires of Mustafar that witnessed his final sacrifice become a pilgrimage site for those seeking inspiration in their own struggles with moral compromise and difficult choices. The mining facility where he died is preserved as a memorial, its industrial architecture a stark reminder of the costs of political manipulation and the importance of individual courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Visitors from across the galaxy come to pay their respects to the man whose final act of defiance changed the course of galactic history. In the end, Count Dooku's betrayal of Palpatine on Mustafar represents more than just a tactical victory for the forces of light. It becomes a fundamental transformation in how the galaxy understands the nature of power, loyalty, and moral responsibility. His demonstration that even the most compromised individual can choose redemption when confronted with ultimate truth provides hope for countless beings who struggle with their own moral failures and compromises. The ripple effects of his sacrifice extend across generations, influencing not only the immediate outcome of the galactic civil war, but also the philosophical and political foundations of the civilizations that emerge from its ashes. The new republic that eventually replaces the Empire incorporates lessons learned from Dooku's revelations about the fragility of democratic institutions and the necessity of eternal vigilance against those who would manipulate fear and crisis for personal advantage. Most importantly, his story becomes a permanent part of galactic consciousness, a reminder that the choice between light and darkness is not made once, but must be renewed in every moment of moral crisis. The Count's journey from idealism to corruption to ultimate redemption demonstrates that no one is beyond hope, and that even the smallest act of conscience can have consequences that echo across the galaxy for generations to come. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. The moment of weakness provides Dooku with the opening he has been waiting for. Using the Force to enhance his speed and strength, the Count launches a coordinated assault that penetrates Vader's faltering defenses and drives him back toward the edge of a lava flow. But instead of pressing his advantage to deliver a killing blow, Dooku does something that shocks both his opponents. He extends his hand in a gesture of reconciliation. "You can see the truth now, young Skywalker. Your master has betrayed us both, used us both as tools in his quest for absolute power, but it is not too late for either of us to choose a different path. Help me expose his crimes to the galaxy, and together we can prevent him from consolidating the tyranny he has spent decades constructing." The offer hangs in the air between them, pregnant with possibility and fraught with danger. For several heartbeats, it seems as though Vader might actually consider the proposition, his yellow eyes flickering between doubt and desperate hope. But the conditioning of the dark side runs deep, and the pain of admitting the scope of his mistakes proves too much to bear. With a scream of denial and fury, Vader unleashes a massive discharge of Force lightning, pouring all of his rage and confusion into the attack. The electrical storm tears across the volcanic landscape, more powerful than anything Dooku has ever witnessed from a single individual. The sheer magnitude of the assault threatens to overwhelm both older fighters, who raise their lightsabers defensively but find themselves being driven back by the incredible display of raw power. It is at this moment that Count Dooku makes the final choice that will define his legacy. Recognizing that the lightning storm will kill not only him and Obi-Wan, but also the unconscious Padme, and potentially cause a catastrophic failure of the mining facility's containment systems, he uses the Force techniques he learned as both Jedi and Sith to redirect the deadly energy toward himself, drawing upon power reserves he did not know he still possessed. The Count creates a protective barrier around Obi-Wan and Padme, while absorbing the full force of Vader's attack into his own body. The pain is beyond description, every nerve ending screaming as electricity courses through his mechanical limbs and organic tissues. But Dooku holds on long enough to speak his final words, his voice carrying clearly across the volcanic landscape, despite the electrical storm raging around him. "Kenobi, you must survive. You must ensure that the truth about Palpatine reaches those who still fight for freedom. The boy, he can still be saved, but only if someone remembers who he used to be." Before the darkness consumed him, the recording devices I have prepared contain everything the rebellion will need to expose the Emperor's crimes and rally resistance to his tyranny. Do not let my sacrifice be meaningless. Do not let the light die while evil triumphs through the silence of good beings who do nothing to oppose it. With those words, Count Dooku's body finally succumbs to the massive electrical discharge, his form crumpling to the volcanic ground as his life force joins the cosmic force. His death has the immediate effect of dissipating Vader's lightning attack, leaving the young Sith Lord staring in shock at what his uncontrolled rage has accomplished. The silence that follows is broken only by the mechanical sounds of the mining facility and the distant rumble of volcanic activity. Vader stands motionless, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly as he processes the magnitude of what has just occurred. For the first time since his transformation, he has killed someone not in service to his master's plans, but as a result of his own emotional instability. Exactly the kind of behavior that Palpatine's recording had identified as his greatest weakness. Obi-Wan uses this moment of shock to gather the still unconscious Padme and retreat toward her ship, clutching the recording devices that Dooku had died to protect. The evidence they contain represents the rebellion's best hope of exposing Palpatine's conspiracy and rallying galactic resistance to Imperial tyranny. But as he carries the pregnant senator to safety, the Jedi Master cannot shake the image of his former apprentice standing alone among the volcanic flames, consumed by the very darkness he had sought to master. The immediate aftermath of Count Dooku's betrayal and sacrifice ripples across the galaxy with the force of a seismic shock. Obi-Wan's escape from Mustafar with both Padme and the precious recordings marks the beginning of a very different kind of galactic conflict than the one Palpatine had envisioned. For the first time since Order 66, the scattered survivors of the Jedi Purge have concrete evidence of the conspiracy that destroyed their order and a rallying point around which to organize their resistance. The recordings that Dooku died to protect contain not only evidence of Palpatine's manipulation of both sides during the Clone Wars, but also detailed intelligence about Imperial military capabilities, the locations of secret facilities, and most importantly, the Emperor's long-term plans for consolidating absolute power. When this information is broadcast through rebel communication networks, it has an immediate and dramatic impact on galactic public opinion. Bail Organa of Alderaan becomes one of the first major political figures to openly acknowledge the recording's authenticity, using his position in the Imperial Senate to demand an investigation into their contents. Mon Mothma of Chandrila follows suit, organizing a coalition of senators who begin pushing for emergency sessions to address the revelations about their emperor's true identity. Even planets that had initially supported the new imperial order begin to question whether they have traded their freedom for security or simply exchanged one form of tyranny for another. But perhaps more importantly, the recordings provide surviving Jedi with the evidence they need to begin rebuilding their shattered order. Masters like Yoda and Windu, who had managed to escape the initial purge, used Dooku's intelligence to locate other survivors and establish hidden training facilities where they can begin preparing the next generation of Jedi Knights. The knowledge that their order's destruction was the result of a Sith conspiracy, rather than genuine treason, helps restore the moral authority they need to attract new followers. The impact on Vader himself is more complex and ultimately more significant for the galaxy's future. The young Sith Lord returns to Coruscant carrying the psychological weight of Dooku's sacrifice and the undeniable evidence of his master's manipulation. While he does not immediately turn against Palpatine, the seeds of doubt planted during the confrontation on Mustafar continue to grow, manifesting in subtle acts of defiance and an increasing reluctance to carry out the Emperor's more extreme orders. Padme's survival has cascading effects throughout the galaxy. Without the trauma of force choking and the despair that led to her death in the original timeline, she gives birth to Luke and Leia under much different circumstances. Instead of dying in childbirth, she becomes one of the founding leaders of the Rebel Alliance, bringing her political experience and moral authority to bear in the fight against Imperial tyranny. The twins grow up with knowledge of their father's true identity, but also understanding of the circumstances that led to his fall. This knowledge makes them more determined to find a way to redeem him rather than simply defeat him. When they eventually confront Vader as adults, they are better prepared psychologically to reach the good that still exists within Darth Vader's corrupted exterior. The early formation of organized resistance also changes the trajectory of Imperial expansion and consolidation. Instead of facing scattered, uncoordinated opposition, Palpatine must contend with a rebel alliance that has access to inside information about his plans and capabilities. This forces him to divert resources from expansion to internal security, slowing the pace at which he can transform the Republic's democratic institutions into imperial bureaucracy. Military campaigns that might have been swift victories in the original timeline become prolonged conflicts as rebel forces use Dooku's intelligence to anticipate Imperial strategies and prepare effective countermeasures. The construction of superweapons like the Death Star faces sabotage from within as rebel sympathizers use the Count's information to identify and exploit vulnerabilities in the Empire's most secret projects. On a more personal level, the survival of key figures like Padme and the early organization of the rebellion means that characters like Han Solo, Lando Calrissian, and others become involved in the galactic conflict much earlier and in different ways. The smuggling networks and criminal organizations that might have remained neutral are drawn into the fight as the Empire's expansion threatens their independence and profitability. The psychological impact of Dooku's redemption also resonates throughout both the Rebel Alliance and the Empire. For the rebels, his sacrifice becomes a symbol of hope, demonstrating that even those who have fallen to the dark side can choose to do what is right when confronted with ultimate truth. For Imperial forces, particularly those who knew Dooku during the Clone Wars, his betrayal raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of loyalty and the true goals of the regime they serve. Perhaps most significantly, Dooku's final act begins to unravel the carefully constructed narrative that Palpatine had used to justify the transformation of the Republic into the Empire. The revelation that the Clone Wars were orchestrated by the very person who claimed to be their victim undermines public trust in Imperial institutions and creates space for alternative voices to emerge in the political discourse. The long-term consequences extend far beyond the immediate military and political impacts. The early exposure of Palpatine's true nature prevents him from completing the systematic elimination of Force-sensitive individuals that was a key component of his long-term strategy. Hidden Jedi academies begin training new students, while other Force traditions that might have been destroyed or driven underground find the courage to emerge and contribute to the growing resistance movement. The preservation of this diversity in Force traditions has implications that extend centuries into the future. Instead of the binary conflict between Jedi and Sith that had characterized galactic history, a new synthesis begins to emerge that incorporates wisdom from multiple traditions while avoiding the dogmatic extremes that had led to previous catastrophes. As the years pass, the legend of Count Dooku's final stand on Mustafar grows in the telling, becoming a touchstone for beings across the galaxy who struggle with questions of loyalty, redemption, and moral choice. The man who had once been one of the galaxy's greatest villains becomes remembered as one of its most unlikely heroes. Proof that it is never too late to choose the light over the darkness, even at the ultimate cost. The recordings he died to protect become foundational documents for the new galactic government that eventually emerges from the ashes of the Empire. His detailed knowledge of Sith philosophy and methods proves invaluable in designing safeguards against future manipulation by dark side adepts. Even his failures as a Sith Lord contribute to the galaxy's wisdom, providing crucial insights into how good intentions can be corrupted by the pursuit of power without moral restraint. In the end, Count Dooku's betrayal of Palpatine on Mustafar changes not just the immediate outcome of that confrontation, but the entire arc of galactic history. One man's choice to reject the dark side and seek redemption gives the forces of light the tools and inspiration they need to ultimately triumph over evil. Sometimes the most important battles are not won with lightsabers or starships, but with the simple choice to do what is right, regardless of personal cost or consequence. The volcanic fires of Mustafar that witnessed his final sacrifice become a symbol of transformation and redemption, proof that even in the galaxy's darkest hour, hope can emerge from the most unlikely sources. Count Dooku's legacy lives on, not in the monuments of conquest that he might have achieved as a Sith Lord, but in the lives saved and freedoms preserved by his ultimate act of defiance against the darkness that had consumed his life for far too long. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.